In the quaint town of Westbrook Falls, a newcomer stirred the slow rhythms of daily life. This town, seemingly caught in a time loop of its own, moved with a grace that was unhurried, defying the usual hustle and bustle you'd expect. Children played leisurely, and the air, it hung heavy with an eerie quiet that was almost tangible. The newcomer, stepping out of his car, was immediately struck by an unsettling stillness. It was a silence that seemed to drape the town like a spectral shroud. Even the usually bustling gas station was oddly quiet. No door chime to welcome him, no hum of chatter to accompany his entrance. As he approached the soda fountain, the gush of liquid filling his cup sounded more like a roar in the silence. A simple question to the attendant about his day triggered a reaction he couldn't quite comprehend. The attendant froze, his eyes wide with a mix of shock and confusion. The transaction that followed was awkward, to say the least. The only sounds were the rustle of money exchanging hands and the soft thud of the door closing behind him. Driving through the town, the newcomer observed the residents, moving like shadows through their routines. Not a word was spoken, their communication limited to silent gestures and pointed expressions. This pervasive silence, it was not what the newcomer had anticipated. There was no neighborly banter, no playful laughter of children, no hum of life. Instead, the town was caught in a mute dance, a ballet of silence that left him feeling uneasy. After an awkward transaction, he left the gas station, driving through the town where muted residents moved through their routines. The newcomer, now a silent observer, felt the weight of the town's eerie quiet. As he navigated the silent streets of Westbrook Falls, he couldn't help but feel a chill run down his spine, a prelude to the strange occurrences that were yet to unfold. Arriving at the small local hotel, his attempts to engage with the clerk yielded no response. The hotel lobby, usually a bustling center of comings and goings, was eerily quiet. The lobby's normal symphony of sounds, the clatter of luggage, the rustle of papers, the hum of conversation, was absent. Instead, there was only the unsettling echo of his own footsteps against the polished floor. Approaching the front desk, the newcomer tried to initiate a conversation, only to be met with a silence as profound as the town's. The clerk, a middle-aged man with a stern face, didn't utter a word. Instead, he pointed to a stack of cards on the counter. Each card, neatly printed, contained phrases typically used in a hotel check-in. "Name, please," read the first card. "Room number," read the second. The newcomer, puzzled, followed the silent procedure, pointing and nodding in response. Yet as he moved through the process, a feeling of unease began to creep over him. The silence was not just a lack of sound, it was a tangible thing, a living entity that seemed to seep into his very bones. Completing the check-in, the clerk handed over a room key with a curt nod. The newcomer tried once more to break the silence, asking about the town, but the clerk only responded with a hushed finger-to-lips gesture, a silent warning that left the newcomer perplexed. Exiting the lobby, he climbed the stairs to his room. Each step echoed in the empty hallway, the sound magnified in the oppressive silence. As he unlocked the door to his room, he paused, the key trembling in his hand. The silence was no longer just an absence of noise. It was a presence that threatened to swallow him whole. Stepping into the room, he was greeted by the same pervasive silence. It filled the room, pressing against the walls, the ceiling, the floor. It was as if the room itself was holding its breath, waiting for something or someone to disrupt the quiet. Closing the door behind him, he was enveloped in the silence. In his room, the silence lingered, amplifying the isolation. Scene script. Days unfolded in a disconcerting pattern. At the diner, patrons pointed at menu items, yet the once mundane act now carried an unsettling weight. The newcomer, still clinging to his hopes of finding a voice in this town, tried to initiate small talk. He'd comment on the weather, make a quip about the coffee, anything to break the silence. But his words, once a bridge, became an island, isolating him further. His attempts were met with a chilling response. The clatter of cutlery ceased, the chewing paused, and the room fell into a hush so profound one could hear a pin drop. All eyes would turn to him, their gazes filled with a mix of curiosity and alarm. It was as if he had committed some unspeakable crime, violated a sacred code of conduct. The townspeople, who had been wrapped up in their own silent world, would then collectively perform a gesture that was becoming all too familiar. They'd lift their fingers to their lips, a universal symbol for silence. Each time it happened, it felt like a cold hand pressing down on his voice, choking the words before they could escape his lips. The newcomer tried to understand the silent judgment. He wondered if he was the subject of some elaborate prank, or if he had unknowingly stepped into a town of mimes. But the reality was far more incomprehensible. The people of Westbrook Falls weren't silent by choice. It was as if they were under a spell, bound by an unseen force that stole their voices and left an eerie hush in its wake. He found himself drawn into their world, a silent observer in a town that spoke in gestures and expressions. His words, once his weapon and shield, were useless here. They hung in the air, fading into the silence, leaving behind a man grappling with the inexplicable. The newcomer's attempts at conversation met with a collective pause by all, eyes turning to him in a silent judgment that pierced through the stillness. His voice, once a beacon, now echoed in the silence, a stark reminder of the town's mute curse. As he persisted in breaking the silence, a strange affliction gripped him. Our newcomer, once a stranger to this town's peculiar ways, found himself in the throes of the very silence he had tried to shatter. His voice, once a beacon of noise in the town's sea of quiet, was starting to flicker and fade. He would open his mouth to speak, to call out into the void, but his words would dissolve into the ether. It was like trying to catch smoke with bare hands, each phrase slipping through his fingers before he could fully form them. The harder he chased his voice, the faster it seemed to retreat, a cruel game of cat and mouse. His voice became a ghost, a phantom that would haunt him, a specter of the world he once knew. He would wake up in the middle of the night, his own silence ringing in his ears. The absence of sound became a presence, filling up the room, pressing against his skin, seeping into his pores. Every small sound was magnified, as if the world was compensating for his loss. The rustling of sheets, the ticking of the clock, even his own heartbeat felt too loud, too intrusive. The silence wasn't just in the town anymore, it was in him, consuming him from the inside out. The more he tried to fight it, the more he was drawn into its clutches. He was like a moth drawn to a flame, the allure of the silence too potent to resist. His attempts to resist only served to push him further into its grasp. With every passing day his voice grew fainter, his words more elusive, until one day they were gone altogether. He had become one of them, a silent resident of Westbrook Falls. The more he struggled, the more his voice waned, until he too succumbed to the town's mute curse. His voice, once a symbol of defiance, had now become a casualty of the very silence he had tried to shatter. His struggle had ended, but the silence, the haunting silence, remained, a chilling reminder of the town's eerie affliction. In the unraveling tapestry of Westbrook Falls, the newcomer became a silent resident. He had arrived as an outsider, as a stranger, but now he was just another mute inhabitant in a town where words had lost their place. His voice, once a beacon of his individuality, had been swallowed by the eerie silence that held the town in its spectral grip. The newcomer's days were now filled with an odd ballet of gestures and expressions, a silent language that had become his only means of communication. His mornings were a pantomime of routines, an elaborate dance of pointed expressions and mime-like movements. He'd point to items on the menu at the diner, his order taken with a nod and an understanding glance. His evenings were spent in the quiet of his room, the silence amplifying his isolation, his solitude. His silent existence was a testament to the town's inexplicable strangeness. Westbrook Falls, a town seemingly caught in a quiet dream, had claimed another voice, had forced another resident into its mute existence. The town's silence, once unsettling, had become his reality, his new normal. He was no longer a stranger, no longer an outsider. He was now a part of Westbrook Falls, a silent resident in a town where words were a lost art. His transition from an outsider to a silent resident wasn't sudden. No, it was a gradual shift, a slow transformation that mirrored the leisurely pace of life in Westbrook Falls. And as he succumbed to the town's mute curse, he realized the power of silence. The silence was not just the absence of sound, but a presence, a force that could bend, could shape, could silence. The once verbose outsider now moved through the slow-paced life, his gestures and expressions the only language he could wield in the enduring silence of Westbrook Falls. He had become a silent resident, a mute inhabitant, a man without words in a town where silence reigned supreme. Have you ever considered the power of silence?